Our final presentation for day one of Automotive History's Driving Futures is Helen Stitt. Helen is the curator, or collections curator out at RACV. She works there part-time. Helen and I work hand in hand, hand in glove. Yeah, not so much hand in hand, sorry. Hand in glove. We have a fantastic resource out there at RACV that has been traditionally underutilised, and Helen has done her best and is doing her best in the limited capacity that she has to actually get those archives in order and make them available. Helen is an architectural historian by occupation, as well as an archivist, and also lectures in architectural history at Melbourne University. Helen's topic is Harley Tarrant, the RACV Harley Tarrant Archive, motorsport, manufacture, and the military. Please welcome Helen Stitt.
I feel a little bit like I'm in the witness box here. Does anyone else like that? Trying to get presented to you so I can have a block of that. Okay, so this paper I think is quite neat in today's program because it ties in quite well. Harley Tarrant was the same generation as William Calder, both were surveyors and engineers, and of course a contemporary of George Innes, so both were motor traders and motor sportsmen. I want to talk about Harley Tarrant because he's so important in terms of history of RACV as a very key foundation member. Harley Tarrant was active in motorsports. He was credited with producing the first Australian-made petrol-driven car on a large commercial scale in Australia, and he also had a very important military career where he was instrumental in the introduction of the car to military exercises in Australia. Significantly for the RACV Heritage Collection, when RACV was approaching its centenary in 2003, one of the largest investments it made to celebrate this milestone was the purchase of the only known surviving Tarrant car, which is this vehicle on your left, a 1906 roadster. For the purposes of my talk today, what I want to focus on is what was included in that purchase, which was the buying of the Harley Tarrant Archive, which has over 400 items, consisting mostly of documents and photographs relating to his personal, business and military activities. So my question for this talk really was, what does this archival collection add to our existing knowledge of Harley Tarrant? And I wanted to look at it because no one else has since it's been in RACV's collection. So it was put together by his daughter really, Doreen, his only child. And she seems to have developed quite a keen interest in researching Harley Tarrant's life with the view of having a biography of him written, and this never occurred. It appears from her annotations on documents that she did this after his death, trying to piece together the paperwork and images he left into a coherent whole. So there's quite a few echoes from the previous speaker as well in terms of Lisa's talk. Harley Tarrant didn't keep a diary, so unfortunately every archivist wants that in their collection. Doreen made many additions to the collection in forms of copies of primary sources in the State Library of Victoria, which she ordered before there was Trove from newspaper and magazine reports, as well as secondary sources written over the years on Harley Tarrant. Okay, so just from his personal files and background of his biography, he was born in 1860 in Clunes, Victoria. He was the son of a miner, Joseph Tarrant, and Carolyn. They were both from Oxford in England. Joseph had migrated with 4 of his brothers, and they all set up businesses in the Clunes and the Ballarat area. His father became a printer after his mining career. He owned the Clunes Gazette, and he went on when the family moved to Melbourne to also own and run the St Kilda and Prahran Chronicles, which were large publications. After attending Clunes Grammar School, Harley was articled to a firm of civil engineers. He worked as a surveyor on the Nullarbor Plain and from 1884 for the New South Wales Department of Lands. Harley returned to Victoria in 1887 and set up private practice as a surveyor with his older brother Joseph, who was known as Stitt. Together they serviced the subdivision boom of Melbourne's expanding outer suburbs, and they had an office in the Citibank Chambers, which is on the corner of Collins and Elizabeth Streets. Business, of course, suffered hugely as a result of the depression of the 1890s. The firm's last city address, 49 Elizabeth Street, lapsed after 1897. So this was very important in terms of Harley's life. He had this huge sort of mid-life divide in his career and personal circumstances. So all his motoring innovations occur in the second half of his life, and he had to build up a new business after financial failure, so that's a rather bitter life lesson to have to learn. He married late, which was no doubt a consequence of this economic sort of lapse in the 1890s at the age of 41, which was late for that stage. And he was middle-aged when he took part in these early Automobile Club of Victoria motorsports, like George Innes. So they were competing against men half their age, which is quite remarkable when you think of how physically onerous these events were. So what do his personal records tell us? This is Charlotte in his home in Campbell. Well, his personal records do give us a lot of information about the family, lots of photographs, and a great many of those do contain cars of various kinds, which are worthy in themselves of much closer study. They demonstrate his very close relationship with his daughter Doreen, but they also seem to me to indicate some sort of desire for social advancement as well, which I found quite interesting. So there were quite a few documents relating to the history of the family name of Tarrant. This is a document on the history of Tarrant Abbey, which was a Cistercian abbey in Dorset. And there's also publications, local publications on the villages around the Tarrant Abbey, these quaint locations. There was absolutely no historical record or genealogical record or even any claim by the Tarrant family that they were related, but it seems like they're looking for this kind of genealogy in this link. And I sort of saw that as being quite relevant in terms of the motoring history from what I know of RACV, the Automobile Club of Victoria, in 1903. They did not allow people who were in the motor trade to be on the board. So even Harry James, who was the person who had the idea of starting up the club, was immediately elected as secretary and then told he couldn't be secretary because he was the advertising manager of Dunlop tyres. So there was a real social divide and hierarchy in terms of whether you were in the trade or not. And I think this probably stuck a little bit for Harley Tarrant. So I'm going to talk about motorsports next, and I'm starting with this ad for Tarrant's in terms of manufacturing, which might seem a little bit odd, but I just wanted to point out that Harley Tarrant was the agent for a lot of motor vehicles, so Fiats, Dions, he sold FNs, Argylls, Rovers, and notably Fords. I won't go into the whole Ford history, but Harley Tarrant didn't make his money out of his own cars. He made it out of these agencies really, and particularly as a Ford agent, importing the S model roadster from 1907, and then a couple of years later selling 500 Model Ts a year. That was what really brought in the money. But in terms of motorsports, he wasn't just driving his own cars, he was also driving these vehicles for which he was the agent. And Jenny's already introduced this. He was in the first Dunlop reliability trial of February 1905. This is probably his most notable motorsports event. So as we know, a reliability trial is not a race. You start off with a number of points and you try not to lose them through either mechanical failure or a driver's failure in motoring skills. So the first contest went from Sydney to Melbourne, over 572 miles, and it was designed to attract public attention throughout Australia to the reliability of the automobile and its possibilities over the rough Australian roads and tracks. It was also, of course, an advertising boon for manufacturers if their cars went well in the event. 23 cars competed, only 16 finished the course, and at the end there were 7 out of the 23 who hadn't lost points, so they were sent to Ballarat and back on a time runoff to determine who was the winner, which in this case happened to be our Captain Harley Tarrant in his 10 horsepower Argyll with Stuart Ross as observer. And we can see that Tarrant made much of this, and so did Argyll. in terms of this victory. And this is repeated in the second trial of November 1905 when Harley actually drives a Tarrant in the event. Again, he finishes first amongst, this time, 4 other joint winners, so they share the trophy. But he made a lot of this win in terms of the advertising of the Tarrant afterwards. The slogan was after that race, built in Australia to suit the worst of our roads, a triumph of engineering art. So in terms of provenance that we've sort of talked about, these photographs are well documented. They're a very reliable historical source. There's lots of verifiable documentary and visual information that goes with them, so it's certainly what they are. But not all photographs are equally reliable in terms of provenance. So the ones that are sort of form a marker, if you like, for other historical research, I find. This is a very well-known photograph. It was taken by Algernon Darge, who was a member of the Automobile Club of Victoria and a well-known commercial photographer and motor sportsman in his own right. It depicts the first motor car races in Victoria, organised by the Automobile Club of Victoria, to take place at Sandown Park on the 12th of March 1904 as part of the Commercial Travellers Association picnic. Harley Tarrant won the event, covering the 3-mile circuit in 6 minutes 55 seconds at an average of just over 26 miles an hour. And this is recorded well in the RACV minute books recording the event. You can look through Trove, there's quite a number of contemporary newspaper articles and sporting journal reports that say Tarrant was driving a 10 horsepower Argyll in this event. Harold Painting, who's the very famous motoring enthusiast who edited the James Flood book of motoring photographs, has clearly identified this as being Sandown, that event. And it's generally agreed that this is a photograph of Tarrant at the wheel of an Argyll. But is this actually the case? So if we look with fresh eyes at some of these early motoring photographs, one thing I noticed when I was just reading the documentary reports was that Trove says how busy this event was. It was a big picnic. All the drivers complained about having to wait back an extra 40-45 minutes to take the ladies on a spin around the course because they wanted to have a go in the cars after the races. We don't see any of that business here unless it's taken before, after, or on the other side of the track. So the other alternative place it could be is Asphodel, which was the country race course at that time. If we compare the vehicles, so that's another view. If we compare the vehicles, so the car on the left, if it's a 10 horsepower Argyle, you think would look fairly similar to the Argyle that Harley Tarrant drove in the February 1905 Dunlop reliability trial. But we can see there are quite clear differences between them. So I'm not a motoring historian, I confess it straight up, but even I can see that the bonnet is quite different, the radiator shape's quite different. Even the workmanship is quite different on the two vehicles, and there are obviously some clear similarities, but you wouldn't necessarily think of them as being sort of twin vehicles. If we compare the vehicle instead perhaps to the 2-cylinder 8 horsepower Tarrant that was driven in the second reliability trial by Tarrant in November 1906, there are perhaps some clearer similarities in the profile of the bonnet, in the radiator shape, even in the positioning of the bolts and so on. It looks like a much closer match. So I guess my conclusion from this is that when you look at a complete archival collection, you have access to a whole lot of images that sort of come together and tell one story. And it does prompt a re-examination of the available evidence. And perhaps looking at such a collection is a timely reminder to revisit these original descriptions and identifications of key photographs and question whether the original assumptions or the original notations were actually correct. I don't have any definitive conclusion, but I think it's a very interesting question. And it does tie into, let's just talk a bit, what do we do with these images? Like in the digital age, shouldn't it be possible for us to have some sort of accessible online archive where people can actually note what's the provenance of images, what evidence do they have of their veracity, and what evidence do they have in terms of identifying manufacturers and even most sportsman locations and so on. This has occurred to me. So in terms of Harley Tarrant's manufacturing, His early career was as a surveyor in Western New South Wales, as I said, and it made him aware of the value and capabilities of motor vehicles. But his first commercial engineering venture did not involve the production of cars. Towards the end of 1897, Tarrant began fabricating 2 to 6 horsepower kerosene engines of his own design at 282 Post Office Place, Melbourne, in Gilbert Street. Priced at £33, his portable 2 horsepower engines pumped water, drove chaff cutters, circular saws, milk separators, and as such, they were a very versatile source of power for economy-conscious farmers. They could also be used for mining applications. They were lightweight, they could be transported easily over rough country, and this product generated quite a lot of income for Harley Tarrant's business in those early years. They were very popular. Harley told his daughter Doreen that he started experimenting with designing internal combustion engines from about this same time, 1895-7. He produced his first car, which was petrol-driven, with a 2-cylinder horizontal engine in the rear, designed with a chain to a countershaft and chain-driven, but this car never really got on the road. Tarrant set up his first workshop at Post Office Place and attracted a working partner who was W. Howard Lewis. The business name changed soon after to Tarrant Engineering Company. Lewis later recalled that he was called upon to perform the following roles: chief engineer, which I think is interesting, office boy, manager, collector, fitter and turner, outdoor representative, and chief of a selling staff of 1. The firm prospered and employed a foreman and moved to larger premises in Queensbridge Road, Melbourne, changing its name in 1900 to Tarrant Motor and Engineering Company. And this time, the editor of Austral Wheel announced that the company has for many years been famous for its stationary motors and has now decided to go extensively into the manufacture of motor cars. This is the head office built in 1905 in Russell Street, near the corner of Little Collins Street, conveniently close to the medicos. They were targeted as major customers of Tarrant, and in a prestigious location next to St Michael's Independent Church. And if you're having trouble placing it, this is what that corner looks like now. Then what happened next was in 1903, Stuart Ross joined the partnership. He was an electrical engineer and he brought with him very conveniently the Argylls agency. So I'm going to have a look at the sort of production sequence according to the archive of what Tarrant cars were produced. So the first one was this prototype that never really got on the road, that I've just described. The second one was that's an image in the archive of the first Tarrant car. So this is interesting just in terms of comparison based on that description. The second car was powered by Ben's engine and sold to Mr. W.H. Chandler. And we do have images of quite a few images of this vehicle. Now, interestingly enough, the third car is described as a 1904 10 horsepower Tarrant, which the Tarrant archive says was the winner of the first motor race in Victoria at Sandown Park. So we automatically have a very interesting question here. Is it the Tarrant? Is it the Argyle? Which sources do we believe? And what is accurate? And how do we find out at this point in time? So this is this vehicle again that I've just been talking about. The next car is 1904, a Tarrant car is delivered to Leslie McPherson in Balranald, New South Wales. There's a Tarrant car made for Jack Wallace. Then there's in 1905 a 20 to 28 horsepower motor Braun, which is depicted in the Scientific Australian. Have images of this. There's the car that I've shown you driven by Harley Tarrant in that second Dunlop reliability contest in 1905, which is this vehicle. In 1905, it says also that around this time, 2 Tarrant cars were built in which the company installed 3-cylinder white engines from England, while in the process of building the all-Australian manufactured cars. Now, this is interesting because all the kind of contemporary, well-known research about Harley Tarrant, as far as I understand, was that he built 3 cars, and thereafter they were all 9% Australian-made, Australian engines designed by Harley Tarrant. We need to sort of question the veracity of this story, I think, from this evidence. And then there was a 1906 4-cylinder designed for Russell Grimway, which is Grimway Jr. and then the vehicle that RACV now owns, which I'll show you in a minute. So that is on your right, Russell Grimwade in his 4-cylinder Tarrant. Okay, and this is Morris Smith, who's a former Tarrant employee who purchased the RACV Tarrant in 1932 and then gave it back to the Tarrant family, which is how we ended up acquiring it. The Tarrant family restored the car. So Doreen worked with her sons to restore the car, and she was instrumental in accessing, by that stage, rather elderly motor tradespeople with the skills to assist. So I guess for me the question when looking at this car in terms of the Tarrant Archive is what can we learn about Harley Tarrant's engineering skill? To what extent were the innovations in his vehicle really phenomenal and pioneering, and to what extent was he borrowing from available technology? Now, I couldn't really answer this question, so I called upon Daryl to help me, and through him contacted Graham Jarrett at the Veteran Car Club and Vintage Sports Car Club to come in and have a look at the vehicle. He came in quite interested in the vehicle, thinking that perhaps there was a link with the Argyll, so he was keen to see whether it had an engine looked anything like the Astor engines. Now, Astors were used in early Argyll cars. When you had a look at the RACV engine though and the Astor engine, Graham was quite disappointed because there wasn't actually all that much similarity that he could see. Things like the profile of the crankcase, the shape of the cylinders, the arrangement of the camshafts in the two vehicles is quite different. Graham looked at it for a while and he said to me, he turned around and said to me, you know what it really reminds me of? It really reminds me of a white and hot engine. Which was quite interesting because then I drug out my paperwork for him and said, well, you know, the year before, Tarrant was using white and hot engines in his vehicles. And if you have a look at that comparison, this is very broad and preliminary, this is not even an engine of the same year, but you can see automatically, visually, there are some greater similarities in the two. So I'll just leave that here there. If we look at the engine as a whole, we can see that it's beautifully designed, solidly engineered and constructed. In that 1906, the Scientific Australian said that the Tarrant's 14 to 16 horsepower model with 4 cylinders has a 92mm bore and 120mm stroke, which also makes it more similar to the white and hot engine. Okay. So, this is another research question. I don't have many conclusions in this paper, but I think it's all very interesting, and some of these sort of truths in motoring history do need to be looked at again and examined in the light of new evidence, and also the physical evidence when it becomes available. That's the other side of the engine. Now I'm just going to have a little footnote afterward, if you like, to this talk, and to you about Harley Tarrant and his military career very briefly. He joined the Melbourne Detachment of Victorian Mounted Rifles and became a lieutenant in 1887. He rose to the rank of captain in the Volunteer Horse and Field Artillery Brigade in 1903, and I love this photograph of the motorman on his horse, I think it's great. And then in 1908, he introduced a car to an army exercise at Langwarrin that was witnessed by the Senator George Pearce, the Minister of Defence. Tarrant persuaded the Minister of the reliability and speed the car offered for military use, and the Australian Volunteer Automobile Corps was formed as a result. By the time the First World War had broken out, Harley Tarrant was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, and by September 1915 he was responsible for the entire Commonwealth military motor transport as Director of Automobile Transport. And he had this role right throughout the First World War. So what does the archive tell us about this military role of Harley Tarrant? Well, it's actually the most contentious part of this whole story, because what we know outside the archive is that in 1918, a Royal Commission report charged his administration with inefficiency and waste, alleging that the public had been misled by the extent to which Tarrant Motors was favoured with repair contracts. Harley accepted full responsibility for this and resigned. And he not only resigned from the military, he resigned from his own business. He still owned it, but he took no active role. Didn't come back to it until 1932, when he took over production supervision at Ruskin Motor Bodies. So there's a big lapse in his career. and he was obviously affected by this. I guess there's no evidence of any of this in the archive. It's a family archive. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to have, you know, this kind of dismal end highlighted in this shining motor and military career. But I wonder if it indicates perhaps that Harley Tarrant was clearly a man of formidable entrepreneurial and strategic skill. Do we know that his engineering skill, have we proof that his engineering skill actually matched his other qualities and huge strengths that he had? This is my question, and I'm not a motor specialist, so I don't have the facility to answer it myself, but I think our archive can help the person who can answer that question to a really large extent. So my conclusion is that Harley Tarrant was a very significant Australian pioneer in motoring history. He was a remarkable motor sportsman. He was a keen entrepreneur and a talented mechanical engineer. And the extent to which Tarrant designed his own engines and so on, or borrows from others, needs to be further investigated. And it's also, we need to re-examine the evidence of early motoring photographs and records to see if archival research, what we can find through Trove, etc., can shed further light on identifications that have been made in the past and are long held, but are quite possibly erroneous. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. It's not the first time I've actually heard Helen speak on Harley Tarrant, but the fascinating thing, the last 2 or 3 times, it's a different story every time. As the research actually evolves.
Out of the mask, the box has been opened.
Yeah, and mind you,
440 records.
often Helen and I are having in-depth conversations at 8:30, 9 o'clock, having supposed to have finished at RACV at 5, but anyway. Any questions for Helen on Colonel Harley Tarrant?
It's not really a question, Helen, but Joe Rich has actually written a paper some time ago on Harley's World War One efforts, and kind of clears him
Okay.
by the end, but I'll send you a copy.
Okay, that's interesting to know, because that's not what he wrote in the Australian Dictionary of Biography for Harley Tarrant. Joe Rich wrote it, so maybe it's a retrospective theory.
Thanks, Helen. I have to agree with you about that, re-examining some of the stuff that's given around, particularly some of the photographs. There's a classic one that's sitting on the web. It says it's George Innes sitting in an Innes car. It clearly is not George Innes. He's a small man with a large moustache, had it for years. It's a rather robust man. It's obviously Les W. Pye, but it's out there. It's perpetuated in just about every motoring journalist whenever he talks about the Innes car. So these are things that we do need to have corrected.
This is a good segue to the Harley Tarrant cocktail party, I have to say, at the end of a long day.
That's just been posted on our Facebook. Very good segue.
Oh yes, I should say, well, not only is the actual car in the Chancery Lane foyer, so the lower ground level of the RAC City Club, I do encourage you to go and have a look at it, but you will see the fabulous trophy from the first Dunlop reliability trial on display next to it, as well as a couple of cabinets with Harley Tarrant memorabilia, which you also should have a look at, I think. And you don't stop there, because if you walk through to the next room, the furthest away from the street, that is the billiard room, and there's four trophy cabinets of historic motorsports trophies in there from early Autumn Club of Victorian members, so that's also very interesting, I think. So do take the opportunity while you're waiting for a drink to go and have a browse.